Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby, and I am here with Tish Monaghan, the costume designer for Schmigadoon. And your costumes are, they come, Cecily Strong and Keegan-Michael Key sort of come around the corner. They enter Schmigadoon, and we are greeted by this glorious chorus of very brightly covered ensemble members. And they're so essential in setting the tone for this world. So thinking about that moment when you first enter, what was your goal? What tone did you want to set in that first moment, the reveal?
Well, my goal was to ultimately create a joyous atmosphere with joyous, cohesive colors that worked well within the set and that, worked well with one another. And, we carefully studied what the production designer was going to do. We had to make sure that our characters, the background dancers and ensemble, leapt forward from what was behind them, which was also colorful, but also didn't steal focus from our main cast. And the other goal was still to make them, interesting, within that decisive color palette. So I took a lot of time at the beginning working with my two assistant designers, collecting fabric samples, deciding, what color palette the dancers were going to be in, what color the biddies were going to be in, just making sure that we, separated that world. And then we also had the world of the background extras that were different from the dancers. So we had to just kind of carefully juggle that. So we did a lot of careful selection of patterns. And once we had patterns, be they, florals or checks or plaids, then we had to get a lot of dyeing done in order to relate them to one another in a cohesive color world. So in the end, when we got the chance to see the dancers dancing together on the set and then being confronted by the biddies, it was a pretty uplifting experience.
Yeah,
it was real. I was really so happy with the results.
I think the results are pretty uplifting too. It's a very positive show, I think. And it, of course, is paying homage to many classic musicals. Did you go back to any, specific musicals to sort of get inspiration or do your version of an outfit?
I certainly did because I just wanted to interject at this juncture that I had made myself unavailable for work because COVID was just setting in. I didn't want to be in a scenario where everyone was going to be masked up, including myself, where I wouldn't be able to hear people or communicate. And I put myself as not available. And then I got a phone call from someone who I didn't even know. I wasn't even going to answer my phone. And like a month later, I was, of course, on the show, having been talked into it, specifically because it was like such a joyous thing to be doing. And everybody just enjoyed themselves so much doing it. Once I found out that it was a musical and a dance thing, I was just all in. So of course, I did rewatch things that I had watched when I was like an infant. And certainly Music Man. I forced my husband to watch it with me because he doesn't like musicals. And I converted him. Like it was just, it was just so awesome. I want to watch it again now. And I even watched musicals I didn't have to watch, but I watched Oklahoma. To me, that was a big reference. I even watched a little bit of The King and I, not necessarily having to, but yeah, there were lots of different musicals I watched. And it was because when I was told about the the show originally, I was told that it was set in the 1940s, and I had just finished doing a 1940s show. And then when I spoke to the writer, Senko, I said, well, what period is this? I'm getting a little bit confused. And he said, oh, it's 1920s. And then when I go to do the biddies, it's like, that's kind of like 1890s. So then I just discovered there was no period. It was just musical period. So it's like, it's whatever suited a particular character in a particular song. That was the era. So that's why we've got costumes, ranging really from the 1880s, because the biddies are pretty well 1880s. Keegan puts on things that are reminiscent of the 1890s, the same with our mayor.
Mhm.
He moves up, he sort of sidetracks into the 20s. Other characters are in the 50s, sort of Gilligan's Island based. So that was kind of awesome. Not only enjoying being able to watch all those old musicals again, but being able to just listen to the song, listen to the lyrics, and kind of get a sense of where that character in his heart of hearts was set.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it was pretty interesting for us.
One thing, that's such a classic musical thing to just have musical time period. Another sort of staple of that is oftentimes in musicals, and this is true here, most of the characters wear one outfit throughout the entire thing, or maybe they change once or twice, but in many instances, your costume for them has to be their defining outfit for their journey. So what is that like, really having to convey a character in only one costume?
Well, it's my favorite thing to do. One costume. I consider myself the one costume girl. I like it. If somebody travels to a small town and they lose their suitcase and they have to be there for 2 weeks, you only have to wear one thing. It just takes a lot of, I think, careful thought and careful research, because you actually do want to find what is definitive for them. For the dancers, it's one thing because it's like a swirl of color. For our speaking parts, it's another thing. But it was a convention that I wanted to discuss with the writer early on, because as far as I'm concerned, there's not even the days of the week in that town.
Nope.
However, for the moments where it's important, you need them to change. So for instance, when they all go to the funeral and they're mourning somebody, if you notice, they're still essentially wearing the same costume, but I would just put a cloak or change their brightly colored hat to a darker hat, and try and cover the change of tone in that way. For certain characters, I think for the mayor, he absolutely had to change when it was election time, and it was important that he present himself in a different fashion. That it was, we decided to change him. For other characters, it wasn't so important, but you just wanted to make sure that you nailed who that person was before they went out, I'm going to say on stage, because it was like going out on stage. And we actually had to define their characters before we even met the actors, because it was at a time when you couldn't travel. COVID presented a real problem. When they arrived in Vancouver, they had to isolate. So we couldn't see them and fit them. So I was really only able to see them 2 or 3 days before we did our camera tests and shooting. And I don't know, I think we were kind of lucky and had like a lot of success in what we had illustrated, designed, and put together for our actors.
Yeah. I was struck, thinking back to the concept of color for a moment. So much of this exists in this bright pastel landscape in your costumes here, but then you have someone like Kristen Chenoweth's character, who's one of the only people in very dark colors and stands out in that way. Is it difficult when you have someone who contrasts so much? How do you make that costume fit in with the rest? To
Well,
have a unified thing.
She did have a little school of biddies that worked alongside her, and then we had her preacher husband who was also in like the darker colors.
Mhm.
I think the benefit was she was introduced on a little stage right at the very beginning when the newcomers come into town. And you see her as an entity right there, and you get a sense of who she is right from the get-go. And so because she is such an outlier in a way amongst all of those people in the town and the rest of the dancers, I think that it's good that you can actually track her in those colors. And there wasn't too much of a disparate mood. I shouldn't say mood, but just in terms of balancing color. I didn't have to worry about it too much because the other colors were somewhat saturated. So I didn't feel that there had to be a lot of light adjustment. Oh, here comes the person in the dark colors onto the set. I think it still worked well and made her stand out.
Yeah.
She was awesome. It was awesome.
Yeah, she did a great job. And I was looking, at your resume, and I don't know that I saw any other musical in there. Had you ever worked in musical theater before? And if not, what was this like then? What was the biggest difference?
Well, I've been doing this for several years, for a long time. And I got my background in theater. Like I studied theater at university, and I worked in theater before I worked in film. I've done a lot of different kinds of projects. I never wanted to do sci-fi. I ended up doing The Predator. Who knows? I did, different period shows, fantasy. I put costumes on cats and dogs. And every year I want to retire. And then something comes along that I haven't done before. And this came along, and I hadn't done musical theater before. And I just thought, like, why not? I'll try it, see how it goes. And the timing of it couldn't have been better because everyone was just feeling so dark and dismayed with COVID happening. And it was such an uplifting project. I mean, you walk onto the set where like the dancing was fantastic. The songs were incredible. And you're looking around, and there's a big burly grip standing on the side, and he's got his his arms crossed and he's toe tapping. It's just it was just awesome. And I am so glad I had the opportunity to do it.
Yeah.
Fortunately, one of my assistants is a designer in the dance world. And so she was a great asset to have with me because she had worked with dancers so much and was able, to guide me in just the methodology of creating skirts that were going to be big enough for them, like to do all their twirls and show off their fancy pants underneath. And
Yeah.
it was
Well,
wonderful.
going down that thread for a minute, you do have such a variety of different types of film and TV in your background. There is this, and then The Predator and Twilight. Everything seems like a 180. Do you have like a certain, when you think about how you approach design, is there a style that speaks to you, or do you define your style in a certain way?
I think my route is just to go to the truth of the script. I really try and get into the mindset and really understand what the writer is trying to convey. And I think that's where my theatrical background really helps. And when I was in theater, I also studied acting. And so I come to it from I think a writer's perspective and an actor's perspective, and just try to get to the truth of it. The other thing is that I also just want to have fun. So I'm just looking for those things that are going to give me, first of all, a challenge, and which is what this project did, because I hadn't done musical theater before. And like a big learning curve, I also enjoy that. And surround myself with good people, and just see if we can, while working our 12 hours a day, do something that's worthwhile. And in terms of finding a style, I would say what I'm most trying to focus on at this stage in my career is not to be derivative, to try and think outside the box if it calls for it, and just build something that answers the questions of what we're trying to do, with the project. And just kind of go down that path, but really have a good time.
Well, I think then you've succeeded with this one. It's a great time. So thank you for discussing with me. Thank you for providing a little joy and a little good time while we definitely needed it when
Yes,
Schmigadoon released it in this
absolutely.
pandemic moment. If you're out there watching, make sure you subscribe to Gold Derby. Keep up to date with us throughout this season. And Tish, thank you so much. It was wonderful to talk to you.